their own experiences to add, and I would also like this to be very inclusive of the audience as well. I find that communicating is of course very two-way. It's not just about talking at somebody. So I don't want this to be talking at all of you. I want this to be talking together as a collaboration to learn more from each other about what seems to work, what doesn't, as far as communicating UBI. And each of us brings our own particular perspectives. And sure, like I could talk to you all about, for hours about this kind of stuff. But I really just want to walk away from this having learned something myself from you all. I really focused especially on personal stories. I think that, and this was actually raised by Joy yesterday, even at it's funny we're in the same panel, about experiments, saying that, you can have all the evidence in the world for a basic income and you won't convince somebody who doesn't like the idea. It's the same thing with climate change. I mean, if evidence worked, then we would have tackled climate change situations decades ago. But here we are, we're still fighting this. So this is not just about evidence. It's about finding what works with people, how to reach people, how to build those connections. And I think part of that too is this understanding that we're very tribal as a society. And I think that there's an inclination to build walls around ourselves within our own tribes. And I would say that you're not really collaborating if you're just working with people that you agree with 100% about everything. It's not really much of a challenge. The challenge is collaborating with people that you disagree with quite a bit. And the more you disagree with, the harder it is to build those coalitions. So that's one of the things also I want to bring up today is this idea that a lot of this is about planting seeds in people's minds. You don't want to approach every conversation with a, I'm going to walk away from this and you're going to be convinced of UBI kind of situation. This is here's about UBI, let me share some stuff and I'll just walk away and let you absorb that, and maybe years later you'll come around. So I'm going to get some stories from here and from all of you about this. And I guess we'll start maybe with just some quick intros along the panel as far as maybe what brought you into this, because that even too is part of the discussion, is what made you first start thinking about basic income, and what have you learned even about communicating that to other people so far. And then I want to really open it up, and feel free to, I don't want to do like a whole Q&A thing. I want it to be more of a conversation. So even while we're talking, if you have like a question or something, then like raise your hand and we can in it. But first of all, I just want to start off with intros and then go from there. Thanks.
All right. So, hi everyone. You didn't introduce yourself.
I did not introduce myself. I'm Scott Santons. I've been at this for a few years, so I didn't know.
Okay, all right. I'm Jenna Vandrinen. I am a researcher by employment, but I do mental health and addictions research. So I don't actually do very much basic income research. I just do basic income advocacy because I'm convinced by my other research that that's what I need to do with my spare time. So I've done a little bit of basic income research kind of as a passion project. In my evenings and weekends, I've done some research on Twitter, downloading thousands of tweets and analyzing the trends in them. More recently, I did a media analysis with Lere in Spain and Johanna in Finland, and so we compared the way that basic income has been talked about in the media in Canada, Finland, and Spain. So maybe I'll talk about that a little bit, how we communicate differently in different countries. And then I've had a lot of failures in terms of trying to convince people that basic income is a good idea. So I have some personal experience being an advocate, trying to convince people that this is the right thing to do.
Thanks, Jenna. I'm Joy from Germany, Berlin. I'm one of the co-founders of the My Basic Income campaign that raffles out 1 year basic incomes just to give people like a first taste of basic income and tell society how does it feel, how does it smell, how does it taste. So we are really addressing the emotions. It's not a pilot or something. It is really a campaign, and it's not at all the basic income because it's 1 year. It's 1,000 euros on top. We don't talk about how it's financed. It's really just like sneaking through a little hole in a door into another room that you cannot enter yet. We know all that, but we call it basic income. So that's one of the first characteristics that I can perhaps tell about our campaign. I really like the question because I don't think so much about when I first got into contact. Actually, some months ago, I contacted, there's a small anthroposophic conference center in South Bavaria in Achberg, where there was a conference like 14 years ago or something about basic income, and a friend invited me to it and said, that could be a topic that you like. And I heard many people in Germany heard first about basic income from one business person, Götz Werner, who traveled to Germany and made hundreds of talks about it. So years ago, that was really the mostly the cause why people heard about it. I didn't. I heard it from this conference. And from me, the idea was obvious from the first moment, because being an artist, the mixture between private life and being an entrepreneur was always, if I buy some clothes, I could wear them on stage or in private. So, and I worked a lot about in the field of taxation and what is money and how money is created. And perhaps I can talk about that later, because my path to basic income came because I tried to understand money and taxation and how economics work. But when I communicated about UBI, I left all these topics behind and didn't talk about them. And I think that is very important to achieve a goal, but I will talk about that later.
I'm Ingeborg Eliasson. I'm a journalist, not an activist. This is important for me.
Speak up a bit.
I'm a journalist, not an activist. My name is Ingeborg Eliasson. I remember UBI, or this was more like a hippie thing when, in my mind, before I started studying it. Really not interesting. I've always had a job that I have absolutely loved, and I've spent extreme amounts of time doing it. So this thing about working less, which had been a discussion in Norway in the 80s, to live more, work less, did not appeal to me at all. I came into this, I got the notion of UBI by a colleague in 2012. I totally did not get it, but then I was working on a book about labor changes in Europe after the financial crisis, how labor conditions have changed, how labor laws have been changed, and to a large extent made life very much more insecure for millions and millions of people on this continent. And in that work, I encountered people who had thought more about the issue than myself, pointing to UBI as a solution to the insecurity, that the precariousness that is spreading in the globalized labor market and economy. And then I'm married to Sven Egil, and we started discussing because he had some other entrance into the same issue.
Yes, I think for me it started, we moved to the US in 2010, lived there for a year, and then on to Brussels and to Berlin. And everywhere we went, we saw that there were changes in society that were not so visible in Norway. I was reading up on the development of technology and how automation was changing the way people work, and every book I read about it seemed to end with a discussion of UBI.
Can you please?
No,
So,
somehow Siri got into the discussion.
Shut up, Siri.
Shut up.
So after a while, we started discussing between us, how come that you work on working relations and working conditions, and you end up in discussion of UBI, and when I read about technology, they always discuss UBI. But in Norway, it was really a fringe theme. No one was talking about UBI in Norway. I know it's really invisible in the Norwegian political debate. I've been a columnist for 25 years, writing very normative column. I want people to change the way they think, so I try to introduce arguments that will make people see the political issues from different perspectives. And so we started discussing this, and then we thought maybe it's a good idea to write a book that will try to bring the discussion from Germany, from the rest of Europe, from the US into the Norwegian scene, because we think that the two main entrances, the working conditions and the technological development, of course, will also affect the Norwegian society, although maybe a bit later and a bit weaker than other societies. So that's how we ended up writing a book on, which is called the Norwegian Borgerlønn, Ideen som endrer spillet, which is UBI. It's a game-changing idea. And it's more of an introductory book to the Norwegian public to see what is UBI and what are the different notions of UBI and how can it be framed in different ways and what are the position of the Norwegian political parties and employers union and the trade union on this. So our book is different from many other books on UBI because it's written for a public who doesn't really know much about it.
Yeah, so something I've learned in my writing is you know, everything I write, I try to think of like a different angle, and of course, it makes sense to me. And I know that it reaches a certain audience, but I'm always surprised too by some things certainly seem to resonate with groups, you know, larger than others. Even the ones that don't resonate as much as many people can resonate quite strongly with a small number of people. So I'm curious, from your book and from the response to the book, like what has, you think, you know, resonated with, say, the most people, and what do you think seems to resonate with strongly with a small number of people, and also what seems to be like not work, like what, when people think about this and it just kind of like blocks them off, like, no, I'm not interested.
I'd say blocking off is here happens very quickly with this money for nothing. But most people that I speak with seem to think UBI is like the ideology is that we should not work. We should go home and lie on the sofa or do anything comfortable. We should actually not work. Which is, from my understanding, not the case at all. And in fact, I met in my research going around for the book people in Switzerland saying, you know, it's freedom to work with something meaningful. And this is a totally different frame that would sell better or easier in Norway, where I find that this bullshit job discussion has a lot of traction. People, you know, when you ask a group of people, can you relate in your work to the notion of empty work, meaningless work, pseudo work, or bullshit tasks? Hands go up all over the place. So this is a way in. What? Well, we work, we labor, but what do we do and why?
Yeah.
This has traction.
Also, there was a moment when we had the book launch here in Oslo last fall. When I came into the room, usually on a book launch in Norway there will be something between 50 and 150, 200 people, and the room was crowded, and they had to close the doors half an hour before we started, and 95% were young. And I think we were not expecting that. The publisher were obviously not expecting that, that the audience would be so young. And when we have gone around talking about the book, the same thing has been happening all over the place, that suddenly we have an audience that usually don't go to these kind of events, and they are young. So to us it says that the theme, the reality that triggers this discussion is much more visible to the young people than to people from our generation.
Yeah, and that's true across countries. I've seen the surveys that have done country after country after country, and the demographics show that it's always, that's like the one thing that you see in every country is that the younger the people are, the more they agree with the idea. So there's
And also
definitely
people
something
over 65 or something who are already, like Annie yesterday, who experiencing freedom without having them being forced to work, can relate a lot to it. So
Interesting, 'cause in
I
the
found
US
that
it's
there's
not the case.
there's a gap between 30 and 50, but younger and older people can relate a lot in Germany. Is that the same?
Yeah, that's one of those things I'm surprised about too in the US, because you would think that people who are feeling economic security would feel that that would be valuable to a lot of other people.
Mm.
But in the US, it's almost like a I got mine attitude.
Yeah.
There's still a sense of deservedness, I think, in America, that you're entitled to this pension. It's an entitlement thing because of how hard you worked. I don't think they equate it with.
Yeah.
There's people raising hand.
Yes, is there a question here?
I would like to ask you that if it's the youth that comes to your book launch, could it be because of the education system that like pressures young people to like know from almost the first class that they have to do like this 12 years of school and then university and blah blah blah? Could it have something to do with that the education system actually is making the young people sick? They're like getting depressed. They're like everything. Could it have something to do with that?
No, I think my impression is that they know the precariat. They experience the fact that even they've been told that especially in Norway, an education will grant you a solid and job and a good salary, and they experience it's not true anymore. It's they will go from work to work, from like everyone talked about yesterday. They are moving from like James Bloodworth. His experience is more extreme than you will find in Norway, but they see the same thing. So to them, it's a growing reality that they have to live in another economic reality than their parents. So they are trying to see, well, how can we then rearrange the economy in another way that is not suited for, that is better suited for the modern situation where you will not have one job for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think there's a passion there too, as in they're being told by the older groups, you know, at least in America, this is especially the case where, you know, it's like this belief that just go find a health wanted sign and get your job and then work over the summer
Across
and
the
then you're
street.
fine for school for the next 4 years. You know, it's like, that's not how it works anymore. That's not the reality, but kids are experiencing that reality.
And I think it's also the intersection of multiple issues. Like, it's not just economic precarity for young people, but they're also in an environmental ecosystem that's collapsing, and they're, you know, faced with technological automation, and they can see it, you know, very viscerally. So I think it's the intersection of all these issues, and UBI presents an alternative to many of these collapsing systems of freedom in multiple ways. I think it's attractive. But it is true that students are increasingly stressed. I mean, I teach mental health to students who are increasingly experiencing mental health issues, but I'm not sure that that's the connection to UBI necessarily. I don't know.
If I may, I would like to lay out a core thesis of my communication work connected to what you say, because there's this huge intersection, and you can think UBI with many topics, and there are many doors to the topic of UBI, from fighting climate change to having ideas about how taxation could be different, from the commons, you can add your own ideas and your own topics that are close to your heart. And I think there are two possible ways we deal with that. We can see it as a room where we discuss UBI, and there are many, many doors. And people from many, many doors can come there. We can all welcome them to the discussion about UBI. Or what we can do is we make compartments and in this room, and people come from the door and talk to the people who in the UBI scene who have the same issue. So, for example, like with the VAT taxation, we had that yesterday. So one person said, yes, UBI and VAT taxation, that must go together. And one other person says, I hate VAT taxation. And then they talk about VAT taxation and not about UBI. And so we can compartment things And I have this in the German discussion really a lot. I've been working in the field for 14 years and I'm so fed up. It was really, I was angry about it. I was in the German network and all stuff. And it was always a discussion about other topics. Like there are the leftists that say it must be an emancipatory basic income. And if it's not emancipatory, I don't like it. Because then it's the business people who introduce it and it's a Trojan horse. So it's dangerous. And there are people who say, yes, we need basic income, but with a minimum wage. And without minimum wage, it's very different and difficult and dangerous. And also with the taxation and how money is created. And I have a stance on many of those topics. I would change how money is created. I would like to fight climate change in a different way than we do it today. I would like to have taxation changed from we do it today. But when I communicate UBI, I leave all these topics behind. Because I want to open discussion to anybody who likes the idea. So I want to talk about in the face at the moment where we are, about the core idea of UBI. That's why we did this campaign, just letting people trying it out and asking them, how does it feel? What's your experience? And we never talked about, for example, how we want to finance it. Because in the moment where you want to give a solution how you finance it, you have to make a solution to finance it this way or that way. And then some people like your idea of how to finance it, your scheme, and some other people dislike it. And so I think this is very important in the way how you are framing. And if we do not do the framing out of the scene, then others do the framing. Then there are framings like we heard it. In German, we have this term like Stillhalteprämie. Fortunately, it went down. It isn't used anymore. But it's something like a premium for being quiet. So that's a very bad framing. And the more we say basic income is dangerous if it's not combined with this or this part of my personal agenda, then people hear basic income is dangerous. And on the controversy, there are quite paradox things, like we had a politician in Germany, the Berlin mayor, who introduced an idea of he called it solidary basic income. And the idea has nothing to do with basic income. It's just like the right to get a job from the government,
Right.
and then have a basic income. So it has nothing to do with the UBI. But people called our campaign and talked about basic income. It brought up the idea. And the people on the street only knew from this discussion, oh, there's one person in the Social Democrats who's for UBI now. And people don't talk about his agenda anymore, but it helped promote the topic because he used the word basic income in a positive way. So we are at a stage, my thesis is, where emotions and the connotations, associations are way more important than arguments or technical questions about the topic. And which is not, just to wrap it up, which is not a point that I say we shouldn't argue within the scene about technical questions and dig deeper. But when we are communicating it to the broad public, we should be aware which kind of communication sucks people, draws people into the discussion, and which kind of communication pushes them out.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
That's great.
I find that one thing that draws people into the discussion in this country is when you speak about the beloved by most of us welfare state, that most people are very conscious about being really something extremely valuable. And that could be thrown away if we don't try to, And it was made, the ideological base for it was that we would have to get away from a place where people were on their knees and with hats in hands asking for charity. People should be able to live with their dignity. Now, in a funny way, and this is an argument that I see works in communicating UBI, this system has become somehow a caricature of that, where we again have so many control mechanisms in order to make sure that our precious system is not misused. That, in fact, the state gets so far into your life that it feels humiliating, and there's a lot of shame, actually, connected to receiving some of the benefits that are not universal. And so it's, on one hand, everyone is more or less taken care of if you really are in need, but the conditions are so horrible sometimes in the experience of people. And this argument, I think, has some traction.
Yeah, I found that just and you use the word too, dignity is one of those words that really rings true with people, and like shame is the opposite of that. I feel that there's a lot of shame in a lot of these conditional programs. And Joy, I just wanted to add to yours. I really like the circular room with a bunch of doors around it, kind of thought experiment. And I would just like to add to that, from my own experience, I feel that it's helpful to have, say, a greeter at each door, and who knows the door that they're entering in. It's like a member of their tribe again, and so you can say, "Hey, welcome in. This is why, UBI. I hear you," and then you can draw them in more. And I feel that that's just one of those things where it's the same thing if you look at climate change. That let's say in the U.S. there's a lot of the Christian right who are against climate change. And so like one of the best ways to reach them is actually through the Christian right. You find someone who they consider to be someone that they trust, someone who's very religious, and someone who goes to maybe their same church, and they're able to talk with them, and then that can help to actually bring them into the rest of the space.
There was someone here with a question.
Yeah, I have a question. If there's a common denominator or something, how to
talk that we can hear it.
Yeah, if there is a common denominator or something with to refine UBI, so you don't without talking about all these other angles, like. How do you describe UBI without?
So let's see. Are you asking that maybe is there one way of talking about UBI that especially works? Perhaps.
Yeah, but like how can you describe it without talking about tax progressivity or all the other angles, like he mentioned, that so it becomes another discussion.
We've used the idea of a floor because the floor is easily understood. This is a floor without cracks.
Yeah.
So it's a floor where everyone, and there's a book, Andy Stern's book, Raising the Floor, which also makes sense in the American sense, that you have an elevated floor which is high enough that everyone can live a dignified life on this floor. There are no cracks in this floor. You can't be thrown out of this floor. So it's a floor, it's a universal floor that carries everyone without cracks. This is an idea. Then you can build your common room on this floor and invite everyone in to discuss. But I think you have to have one. I think at least in a society like Norway, where the idea is not well known, you have to have this common denominator. You have to have one concept that makes sense when you have just a brief period of time to explain the idea, and I think for us the concept of the floor has been working very well.
Yeah, I use the word foundation too. It's something that we know that we build on a foundation. It's not just something that sits there.
You could also use images, like in countries where there's free healthcare and people accept it, so yeah, everybody gets it. So you have an image, or I sometimes use it that it's like a free breakfast, not a free lunch, but before you go out into society and go to work, you have a breakfast.
Yeah.
And not you just, first you work and then you earn the money to buy your lunch. And then you can buy your lunch after you went out and got more money. So find some images that people can relate to and understand, yes.
On the floor thing, there was this legendary Swedish Prime Minister Tage Erlander. He is quoted as saying, social democracy is a floor where people can dance their lives. And I think that made sense when in the 50s and 60s when this system was developed. But now the floor is cracking in our countries.
Barb?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in my experience in the UK, that and talking to people who've never heard about basic income before, just face to face, that what they really get immediately in the UK, and maybe this is because there's been such a big publicity campaign against welfare and against welfare recipients, is to use the word dividend.
Mm-hmm.
That this is everybody's share of the economy. And it's also, like, through that, it's also been then easier to talk about how different people contribute, regardless of whether they have a job or not. I found, although I came to it through welfare, okay, because I've been on welfare and I'm a welfare advisor, there's a lot of resistance to, say emancipatory welfare, for example. It's like, well, I don't want welfare, so whatever. But yeah, just that, this idea that we all have a share in the economy, that we all contribute in some way, whether we have a job or not, whether we are ill or not. So, that the care, the carers, but also the cared for are also contributing. I think those sorts of things seem to be.
Yeah.
Okay, to add to that because dividend is, in Norwegian setting, dividend is a very controversial concept.
Okay.
Yeah, so dividend turns into utbytte is something you often discuss as something unwanted. It's you talk about the dividend in commercial life. So you can't use that word in Norway with the same concept that you have in the context that you have to in Britain, which means that you have to adapt also your language and your framing to different societies.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's one of the key things that I've learned is I try to speak in the language of the people that I'm speaking to. And so part of that too is you have to listen too. You can't just speak. In order to know what language they're speaking, you have to hear them first.
Hey, panelists, can you
Translate
speak a bit louder or we
So we
don't
can
hear you?
Sure.
And there are also many, many free seats in the first row. That could make it easier for us to.
So I'm saying that
Microphones, do you have
Is-
microphones?
No.
Downstairs. Yeah.
We can try, but if it doesn't solve the problem and you're hearing us not loud enough, there are many seats also here.
saying that in order to speak in the language of somebody, you have to hear what language they're speaking first. So you have to actually listen. That's why listening is so important. And then you can actually speak in their language.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
and
Enno
that-
has something to say.
And that's different if it's a discussion in the whole country, the whole population. So the experiences from Switzerland, where we have had that referendum and the debate in the entire population, is you cannot think about so much what people like to listen, like to hear. It's better to trust yourself and talk what you enjoy to talk about. Because you always make a mistake if you are focusing on, let's say, the academics or, let's say, the lefties or whatever. It's always wrong, because then the opposite is growing up by then. So for me, the most important for public impact is first to create something that is interesting for the medias. You know, the discussion in the United States grew up, and the wave came when we dropped out 8 million coins on the pavement in Switzerland. That was the image, and that moved. And the campaign Joy talked about now is the most popular and most asked for campaign in Germany, because they do something. There is something visible. You know, the discussion about pilot project is not very interesting. Pilot projects are media attractive. That's not the case. It's not to test people. It's nonsense to test people how they behave. But you have something in your hands. So to work with medias means deliver things medias are interested in. So medias has no meaning, no moral thing, anything. It's just functioning by attractive things. And to create things which are visible and reportable, no matter what, it's what Joy said, also bad news are news, and also bad news spread the idea. So I guess this is the same in every country, to do things. Not so much to have an anxiety, what can I say, what can I not say. That is not good for your mental health. It's better to speak out what you like to say. And and don't underestimate the power and the strength of the idea. So we are advocates for an idea. Don't underestimate the power of the idea. This idea hits and what's the name in English? It meets every single person in their being. So we are just transporting the idea, and then when we reach people, people start to think about it, because it's touching them. If it is the core idea, if it is not any topic about whatever. So if it's really the idea of an unconditional universal basic income, no compromises at all, then this idea is working. So to have a view or a strategy for public relation and public impacts, I guess it's not so much that we have to define what people should discuss about and what they think about, but to create images. And finally, in a discussion, for example, the winner is who is more empathic, not who is right. It doesn't matter. More sympathetic, looking better, more sexy. That's how it's working. And watch to yourself. It's by yourself the same. But topics that are not so close to you, you are judging the same way. So that's what I want to say, and to add to what Joyce said, because they are doing things, medias are reporting, and they are invited everywhere, and so on and so forth.
I have just a couple things to add to this. I think I really agree with the listening part. Usually, I think I found I started having more enjoyable conversations that were more successful, I guess. Once I stopped caring about the outcome, once I stopped trying to convince people or had an agenda and just thought about how did we get into this conversation, what led us here, do we have a shared passion about, you know, violence against women, or is it the environment that we were talking about? And once I became detached from trying to convert people, it thankfully happened pretty early in my basic income work. It was so liberating for me, and I think also for the people listening. So but I find there's like a couple of stages almost of the conversation, and you know, sometimes have all of these stages with one person all at once, or sometimes we come back to them years later. But I think there's the idea, like people, that's what you need to start with, making sure people understand what the idea is, which is probably what you were trying to get at. What is the essence of what you're communicating? And then I think there's the why, which people come to on their own, or you could have shared debate about these multiple doors, and you could suggest some that you think might, you know, have some resonance with somebody. But then I think there's also a credibility element that I found important in communicating that has been very helpful. I didn't really, in the introductions, share my basic income origin story, but I think I'm probably one of the very few people who's like convinced entirely by evidence, almost. So I truly like read about basic income and I was like, does this actually work? Oh, it does. Okay, I'm in. And so I think that for some people, that credibility piece is helpful, and it doesn't need to be statistics, but sometimes it's, so we have International Basic Income Week, and Manya's sitting here and she's done so much work for it, and I think it's so helpful that we have each other, that we can say, well, this is not just my idea, it's not a crazy idea, they're doing it in Berlin, they've given out hundreds of basic incomes, you know, in Germany, and we can show the picture of the coins in Switzerland, and we can talk about the pilot project in India. I think there's you could find credibility in so many ways, but I think it's very important later in the discussion to add some element of this is not a fantasy, or it is a utopia, but it's not an unrealistic one.
Yeah, and along those lines too, I'd like to go back to Joy, because I personally would like to hear some of these as well. I mean, you have heard and you've created and heard so many stories, the personal stories of people. And even so, one of the most interesting ones was actually through their experiment, and it wasn't one of the participants. It was actually, they hired an unconditional intern. And so this intern really did not have to do the work that they wanted them to do. And what they learned, so Michael Bollmeyer got kind of like in an argument with the intern. And the intern, you know, didn't have to come to work the next day. You know, she didn't, and you wasn't going to get fired from it. She would get paid anyways. But she did come to work the next day. And what's so interesting about that is that so often we talk about the employee perspective of the you know, ability to say no. But I only have heard this and never would have considered it. But Michael, as the employer, felt like a sense of pride that she went to work that day, even though she didn't have to. And I just think that's like a really powerful kind of thing to think about. It's that not only if work is fully voluntary, then you are choosing to do that. And if you're an employer, like how amazing is that everyone who works for you really wants to work for you and really wants to be there. versus just people who are only there because they need a paycheck. Like, I think that's really powerful to think about. So I'm curious, what other kind of stories have you gotten from that like really, that you wouldn't have even considered?
Perhaps I can explain a bit also on that, because I see some question marks in eyes. Actually, for me, it was very important that not only we campaign for basic income, but we also, not only because, but also because of authenticity, but also because of the personal process of the team, which is now 30 full employed people working full-time on basic income for Germany, that we also live the values that we are promoting and advocating internally in the team. Because once, that gives us more credibility and authenticity. Secondly, that attracts the people who are good advocates because they like the way how we work, and people who promote basic income perhaps like to live those values already. And also we have another level of pioneering and having more stories, not only the winners, but also the team story that we have. And this is why we made things like 4-day week work, so you're not crowded with work, and like a startup, we're like a startup energy, so sometimes we work 7 days a week, and so we try to find, how can you find work-life balance when you can work but don't have to work, because there'll be challenges in the basic income topic that are related. And also everybody in the team is deciding themselves how much they want to earn. So there's no one who says you earn that much, but you say how much you want to earn. And you try to figure it out with the money, the whole money the team has as a resource, and how much of this money do you want to have for your own life, and how much do you need to have a life, to have a head free, and to be, like Werner, the German evangelist, said it, what do you need so you can come to work and contribute? So the money is like the prerequisite that you know that you need to be able to contribute to a project. Yeah. And one of those ideas I had was this unconditional internship, because our team was growing. We were 4 or 5 people, and we said, now we have a team size that we could like to have an intern. But how would we, with our values, implement an internship? It could not be someone who makes coffee for the team. So we said, well, the really, I'm missing the word, the 100% way to do it would be ask a person, select a person as an intern, and then let them come and give them no jobs. And they can test, they have access to everything. They even had access to the meetings where other team members had no access. So perhaps we were pitching for 100,000 euros with some rich guy. And we want to do it, Michael and I, we want to do it alone and just focus on that, or preparing a talk. But the intern can go everywhere, can get access to Twitter, to Instagram, to anything, and can just use it. And can totally spend all the money the company has. So, like in a palace, the Joker, who's the only person who can tell the king the truth. So that was the idea behind it. And so part of this was that this person had no obligations, and he or she could just be for 3 months in Berlin and lie in the park and get the money, the $1,000. It's the same like the winners. But we asked them to Twitter or make a blog post or make a video about their experience. And this was part of it, that she said, oh, this is a bad atmosphere here, I will not come tomorrow if it's this bad atmosphere here. And we had to ask her, what can we change so you want to come tomorrow? So we were challenged. And then later we tried to get rid of management, we put in holacracy and sociocracy. So just trying out some new work, how would it work? So these are stories that we don't tell so often, because the stories of the winners are more powerful. But when we have specific audiences that are interested in all these new work stuff, then this is also very valuable stuff that we can share.
Yeah. Is someone over here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, because I mean, not a lot of people maybe have this experience in the workplace that they really have this unconditionality, but we all have these experiences from other private settings where you actually would have relationships that are a bit conditional, so where you were expected to do certain things and you know how it feels and how bad that is. And you have these other relationships, hopefully, where it's completely unconditional and how good it actually feels to do something unconditionally for someone else or receive it from someone else. And you can use this because you can explain someone, and you yourself maybe experience that in a work environment, but just let them really get this feeling rising up that they had in relationships like that, and just imagine like this feeling you had with this like person that is important to you, how would it feel if that person would be society and not your mom or your sister or whoever? And I think that's also quite powerful if people get this connection to this feeling. But it's on the other hand also the point where I sometimes get stuck in communicating it, because there are people who don't get this unconditionality aspect, and I don't know how to create this feeling with them or let them remember a situation where it was. So that's like my main question, how actually get people trusting in this unconditionality.
So how to speak about unconditionality in a way that they'll hear the value of it.
Yeah, because it's really a thing, like you said, it's not anything you can convince someone with facts. Or maybe you can, and I don't know the facts. Yeah, how to actually let people relate to this feeling, because if they had a lot of experience in their life that were contrary, how to de-learn these experiences? That would be my question.
May I shortly add there, because you said this listening and also like going unconditionally into a discussion, not trying to convince someone. We just had a ride here with an Uber driver this morning because we were late. And he said he was just coming from the US to Norway, which is also interesting because we talked about different cultures. And we asked him, what's the difference? And so he was here for 3.5 months. And he said, well, it's so structured and relaxed here. And society gives so much to me. And taxation is quite high compared to the US. But as I get so much back from society, like healthcare, and if I lose my job, they are there for me. I wouldn't bother if they tax me 80%. And so with just listening, we got a very nice argument for UBI. So for sharing more, taxing more, but sharing more services and building a floor, as he made his comparison of US and Norway. So he made the best argument for UBI that we could never have made within a 5-minute discussion in a cab ride.
Yeah, and like, so I would tie that to, we know like from the evidence from Finland, one of the interesting pieces is the fact that it grew trust among the participants for other people and for government. And it's like, you can tell that fact to people, that was an observation, but there's also these personal stories that can resonate so much more, to see like, this person experienced greater trust for these reasons, that's what they said. And that's what you remember more than, oh, there was a 17% increase in trust, you know. Then, yes.
This year is to me very, very central to what to communicating these thoughts. What you were saying now. Here, the trust is the basis of the whole social contract. It's based on trust that you pay, you pitch in what you can do, and I do so too. If we both do, if we all do, we can all take out the great services. It's and when then we are not supposed to have expectations. I mean, people then would argue, with UBI, you would not be allowed to have expectations to other people, which is a central part of a society. We do have expectations towards each other. If we abolish that, what will happen to us? You know, this is a deeper thing than the actual, you have to go to this job, or it's a deeper thing about a social contract based on people being accountable for pitching in, you know. And this is actually something I also struggle with myself when I hear people talk about UBI who are inside the movement, and I would like to hear how you see that working, for instance, within your Mein Grundeinkommen team, when you're not even expected to show up for work.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would say while you're thinking about that, I just want to chime in that I think a lot of it is, and Joy's mentioned this a little bit before, but I think it's an important aspect that it's really different to think about work, and this is true of all work, where are you getting paid a paycheck because you did that work? Or if you really love your work, then more of the case is that you're getting income to enable you to do that work. So like, what comes first? And I think that that's part of it, is that when it comes to society, that it's one way to think, oh, we all owe each other, and so therefore we have to do this first, and then we'll help each other. And another way of looking at it is, well, we all owe each other, and therefore we should actually help each other first, and then that enables each other to do all these things, and of course then work together more.
I would say that it is something that a social group has to learn. Trust is something that you learn. You start with giving a bit of trust in a functioning society or group. You give a bit trust in advance, but you don't give the full trust in the first moment. And when the trust is rewarded and fulfilled and you have good experience, then you give a bit more trust. And so it's a learning experience, and it can also be an e-learning experience. And what I really like is that we all have this experience in some group, with one person, with a small group, with friends, with family. But now we are asking people to consider and imagine having this bond of trust on a governmental, a state level, or perhaps worldwide. And this is for many people, this is the difficult exercise, to increase this experience. So it's like having, if you know the prisoner's dilemma of two people in the prison, and if they trust each other, they come out. But if they talk badly about each other, they stay in prison, but they can talk to each other, so they have to trust each other. This on a state level, with 80 million or with billions of people worldwide. It is difficult, and this is huge, and we have to give people time, and we have to make steps in between. So first you trust perhaps your partner or your family or your mother, and then you can see, oh well, I also trust my friends, and what we try as a team is trust your colleagues. That, for example, for a long time the person who earned the most worked the less, because he was a single parent, he had a child, so he only worked 3 days a week, but as he had a child he needed more money. So it was totally flipping up the logics of getting money for your labor time that you contribute. And we don't ask people to think that a society with basic income would totally disconnect the impact your work does on a company and the salary, but we just try to extend the experience room. And so the team is an experience room of 10, 20, now 30 people that I'm no longer part of. I'm doing the new project. And then there could be perhaps a community. So like in a basic income pilot, that's why it's so important to do pilots where 500 or 5,000 people in one community get it. So see if the trust chains are changing. What is the interpersonal effect? And then you can relate to it. When you hear the stories, what changed within 3 or 5 years? Okay, yes, I can relate to that. I can imagine that. As I said on the panel yesterday, I think 80% of the work of understanding basic income is not learning something about it, but de-learning things and concepts that you have learned about the world already. And so any empiric evidence or any story somebody shares that is challenging the concepts that I already learned and the beliefs that I have that are perhaps wrong is really helpful, because it opens up the possibility room that basic income could be perhaps a solution. And it's nearly always the first step when I talk to people. I realize that it's normally, you said there are stages, normally it's 2 to 3 talks until people really say, I like the idea. And the first one is, no, I cannot imagine, and then they thought about it, they talk to other people, then they meet me again. Oh, perhaps there's something on it, is the next connection after some weeks or months. And then after months I meet them again and said, oh, I read more about it, I start to like it. And it's a process, and we have to give society and all the people time for that, as we give ourselves time. So be patient, trust each other, that it will work out in the end, and we will.
It's kind of a game of inception there too. You know, that's why I think about it, planting seeds, where you get it out there, and there's nothing stronger than when someone feels that they came to the conclusion on their own. You know, like they did their own research by going out and reading things that people have written, and then they're like, oh, well, yeah, I get it now. I'm for it. It can take years.
Yes.
Any question?
Yeah.
What I hear is you are still working within the single story society. You talk about work equals paid work, and that the only thing to get out of work, if worth anything, is money.
I didn't say that, but okay.
Well, earlier I just heard you say work, 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 and you always related that back to paid work.
I just did a whole, did you see the presentation yesterday?
Let us listen, let's listen to the argument.
Now, what I hear in all the presentations is a lot of things you have diverged from that a couple of times, but what I hear in society as a whole, what I hear here is a lot of things going work equals paid work, and not work equals labor you do for love, for example. And what I have noticed, and what I want to ask is how to get out of that single story, because we live in single story societies where work equals paid work. And well, for most people, academics is boring. And they don't want to listen to, as you said, don't want to listen to this many percents and this and that and things like that. So how do you think that it's best to utilize media to get out there with more stories? What do you do the BN thing, different locations of BN and others do to bring out the stories and not the academics? Because the academics, well, they don't want to listen to it. They don't find it interesting because in journalism, it's all about connecting people. Very, oh yeah, I can recognize myself in this story. That's all media is about, really. It's not about telling the truth. It's about finding ways that the reader or on-watcher or whatever can connect it. Yes, I can connect to this. So what is done to utilize that in the media, which is bringing out these different stories more than bringing out the numbers?
Yeah, I have an idea about that. I think that stories are what change people's hearts, actually, truly. And I think it's very important to showcase people's stories. And I think the ones of unpaid labor that have so much value in our society are actually the most powerful, personally. So I'm from Canada, and we recently had a pilot project in Ontario that was abruptly canceled and dramatically changed 4,000 people's lives overnight in terrible and tragic ways. And I think the only potentially good thing that came out of that was that people self-organized to tell their own stories. And there's been sort of pushback, like the government is suppressing our stories by not continuing the research project. They're not going to show what the results are to the world, so I'm going to show what my results are to the world. So there's a humans of basic income movement, I guess you could call it, and it's pictures and stories of how people's lives were changed, and each one of them holds up, you can Google it, each one of them holds up a little story about how their lives were changed. I think that's one of the most powerful things. Yeah, so I think that's something that I've seen that works. I think it's still a little bit insular. I don't know how we break out of our networks, because I think a lot of the same people see those stories, and I would love if new people saw those stories, and I don't have the answer for that.
I guess I would like to hear a specific story that you've seen from the My Greenlight Common, say, and maybe is there a story that seemed to do well in the press there in Germany involving someone using their basic income to pursue unpaid work, some kind of volunteering venture or something like that, instead of, so much of the media seems to be focused on, it enabled them to become entrepreneurs or it enabled them to pursue the employment that they wanted. Was there an example that you can think of where someone pursued some kind of volunteering opportunity in a way that was very interesting?
Yeah.
To the media.
There are lots of stories, and if I'm honest to myself and to you, we also both, the media is asking for the stories, and if they say we want to have an interview with that guy who is so cute, this boy, or this person who is self-employed now, now I'm no longer part of the team, doesn't say yes, but we want you to write about this person. They can offer this, but in the end, a journalist is an autonomous person, and they can decide what the readers or what the editor wants to see have written. And so we kind of change the media circus. And also, to be honest, we are campaigning and we don't want to solve any problems. So we are, for example, we are focusing on political issues, like we would never cooperate with people on the far right. Or we are addressing like feminist issues. So, for example, when we started the thing that everybody defined their own salary, we found out that people who are socialized as women narrow their needs, and people who are socialized as men say, well, I need that much. And so we saw the gap, the gender gap. even in a free room where everybody could say by themselves how much they want to earn. So we said we put on a patriarchy dividend on everybody who is defined feminine of 10 or 15% and increase their salary. And then it felt right.
Can you talk to my boss?
Yeah, just give me the number, her or his number, whatever it is. And so we are addressing this, but this is not the stories that you can read about our campaign in the media. So, because they like certain stories, and it's a cute young boy who is 9 years old. And yes, to be honest, we sent a film team to this cute young boy and not to other people, because we also make decision about our guesses, which stories are appealing most to society. But now, Micha, the founder of the campaign, and a colleague wrote a book about, like, they visited 30 people. So this is a more diverse storytelling now that they can do after 4 years of campaigning, because there's an audience, there's 1 million people signing up. And we couldn't have done that in the beginning. In the beginning, really, it was always the same story. So we were also, in the beginning, a one-story campaign, and then it's diversifying over time. So we are patient by that. And there are many stories, yes, about people who are volunteering, people who are following their dream, like being a speaker for, how do you say, obituaries, learning that on when people are buried, being a speaker, and yeah. And so that was a passion of one person, and I don't know if she gets money for that or not, but I don't mind, because I'm also opening up these categories. Yeah. So I would say it's evolving. Does this help as an answer?
So we only have about 10 minutes left, and I would want to get in a little bit about social media. So Jenna, could you share just a little bit, since you did a project before, like kind of analyzing social media and kind of what you found, how they were speaking about it, what seemed to be popular, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. So I downloaded 5,000 tweets in 2017 for a 4-month period, and I looked at how people were talking about basic income online. So I took the hashtag basic income and downloaded all tweets that had the hashtag basic income. And it was, not a perfectly designed research study, but just a curiosity, actually, and just a way to I was a student at the time, and I didn't have a way to get myself to a conference, and I needed to access this bursary, so I needed to come up with a research project. So I don't do Twitter research. All that to say, I'm a sociologist. I don't do Twitter research, but I still found it really fascinating. So I downloaded these tweets, and I did a sentiment analysis of them, which is when you categorize them as positive, negative, or neutral. And I mean, they were overwhelmingly positive. Or neutral. There was like only 5% of the tweets were actually negative. And then, I found some other things too, that it was often the same voices that were tweeting things again and again. And which is great, because we have influential people who reach a lot of people who, have big audiences. And I think we need them to tweet. But it's also, I was also struck by what wasn't in the tweets. So frequently automation came up. It was the most common topic by far. There was also some trends about welfare and welfare reform and poverty that came up, second most often, I would say. But missing from the data set was arguments about gender equality and the environment. So really, and as you might expect on social media, there's quite a bit more interest in technological issues. But I think it was enlightening in the sense that I realized that conversation on social media is not necessarily reflective of all of the freedom and emancipatory conversations that we're having here, or the human rights conversations. And then later, I did a more text-based, we did a media analysis of newspaper articles in Canada, Finland, and Spain. And then so the trends were, automation was the most common theme in all 3 countries. And the countries had different differences, and it wasn't exactly the same as the social media stuff, but I think it also, it also left me with the feeling that sort of popular themes come up in the media, as you would expect, and in social media, but not necessarily the ones that the ones that we talk about in our conferences. So it was just interesting to see what people gravitate to and what people retweet versus versus the reasons that we might have for actually identifying with the cause.
Can you take someone from the audience or something? There in the back.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that what has been a big success to get people's understanding of the UBI in Iceland, for example, is to talk about the right for education. Everybody now accepts that right for education, basic education, is just a normal part of life. Where would we be if we didn't have the basic education? And then we talk about the UBI as the tool to participate in society, because we are all born in a society. We have no choice. We belong to a society, and a UBI is a tool to survive and to make your way in that society. And if you put this together, the toolbox is education and UBI. And with that, you can have some control of your own life. And then they're not asking about anything else. Yeah, of course. This is in my toolbox. That's all.
I would like, go ahead.
I would like to share an experience last week.
Okay.
We made a presentation in the university.
Could you speak up a little bit louder? I think it's a little hard over here.
I would like to share an experience from last week. We made a presentation in the university, and afterwards we were in the lunch, the faculty lunch. There were some of the professors against UBI, etc. But somebody started telling a story about UBI, I guess it's a California-based company, and they are giving long-distance education, lecturing, all kinds of that stuff. And then discussion continued, and winner takes all concept. They started discussing this. And winner takes all concept in the business, I guess, might be used while communicating the UBI to public. Because things change in that room after talking about winner takes all. So even they are in a secure position in the society, even they are well-paid, they have well-paid jobs, but they start feeling quite precarious about their future. Because winner is really taking all, and somebody from a California-based company is giving driving license courses to somebody in, let's say, Taiwan.
So you're saying, like, in this experience that you had, that people necessarily weren't open to it, and then you broached like the winners take all kind of just understanding that that's the way the economy is working, and then they started thinking about it differently?
Yeah, I mean, all the professions are very brittle against that concept. I mean,
Yeah.
even if you're a professor, well-paid, in a secure position, etc., they start becoming precarious, and I think this is a good point to use while communicating UBI.
Yeah.
In the public.
Yeah, and I guess along those lines, I would like to ask all of you too, to end this, to think about, can you think of any like light bulb moments where you've been speaking to someone about basic income, and I call it a light bulb moment because you can see it in their eyes, and they're just like, something clicks, and then they're like, ah, I get it. Does anyone have like a memory of someone they were talking about someone and then just something clicked because of the way that they understood it differently all of a sudden?
Yeah, I often get the argument that people will just lay on the couch if they get it, and when then I answer that why don't you just work half as much if you want to lay on the couch, and of course get less paid, but they didn't want to do that.
Yes, you're just asking them for their own. That's one of those common things too, where it's weird how, say, if you ask people what other people would do with the basic income, 8 out of 10 people will say that they'll all stop working, and you ask them what they will do, none of them will stop working.
I think also it's like finding a missing link. Like many people think or believe like that, but when they realize that it's not them going to the person on the couch and telling them what to do, it's some governmental agency, and they don't trust the government. So, and then I once had a really lengthy discussion 10 years ago with a social democrat who are quite opposed against basic income. And he really argued and argued against it. And in the end, we came to the point that, what do you think is more efficient if someone doesn't have a work because he believed in work is dignity and work is meaning? So I took him on that position and said, what do you think is most efficient in, you want a person without work finding work, is trusting them that they know best where their skills are, where their possibilities are, what they could do in a good way, or having some state agent in a 20-minute talk finding out what this person had to do. And then it clicked, because he didn't trust the other citizen, but he didn't trust the state either. So in the discussion, he decided to, okay, I trust my fellow citizen a bit more than the government.
Do you have any other light bulb moments in the audience that you can think of where you're speaking to somebody, or even just something that worked well? Maybe even what turned you around, where something that maybe you had already heard about basic income, and then you're like, oh, wait a second.
The very simple fact that when you say to somebody that if you haven't any money, you cannot contribute to society and make sure that the business is functioning. So just by having money, and just in the game Monopoly, when you pass start, you receive a certain sum. This is so simple to say that this is a basic.
Yeah, I see it. That actually works really well, the monopoly argument, I call it, right? Especially with, say, pro-capitalists. And say, hey, even monopoly has basic income. They're like, wait. Do another from the audience?
Many the technologies remove the intermediate parties. I think this is very important. For example, Uber in Turkey is a big problem. Because in normal practice in Turkey, you call the taxi station and somebody is answering the phone and you say, okay, I'm sending you this taxi. Or you say, hold on for a second, please call somewhere else and send me a taxi and send it to you. But during Uber discussions, the taxi drivers and Uber drivers, even they fight. But later on, it was very clear that some of the Uber drivers was ex-taxi drivers. I mean, they are the same people driving the car. But the real danger of Uber is against the people who are staying at the taxi stations and answering the phone. Because that intermediate party is being lost. It's the same case in travel agencies or insurance brokers. So if people are working in an intermediate position, like insurance broker or travel agency, someone,
analysis,
they are losing their jobs. I think this is making things easier, at least to start the discussion.
Yeah, as we hear often about the precarity of work, that's certainly something, and as you said as well from learning from your book, that it's really like this transformation of work as we know it that seems to really be resonating with people. Yeah. Yes.
One thing, you said that old people over 65 wouldn't get it, but if you talk to, another thing that young people get is maybe Social Security won't be there for me when I get to that age, and then they get interested.
Yeah, it's definitely a concern. Yes?
Yeah, I was emphasizing again on the monopoly argument, that was one of the most powerful ones. Another one that also worked in my case was switching the conversation from free money to it's actually just another form of welfare that is just optimized. So instead of free money, use the welfare argument.
Right, welfare system actually works.
People understand it much easier.
All right, so I guess that's it. We're at the end of the time, and thank you for the panel, and thank you, audience.